Thank you. You're
Thanks.
very welcome. It's a learning curve for all of us, but I hope
Yeah.
you enjoyed it. And so we'll be finishing formally this session. If anyone would like to contribute to a crowdfunding session, there's a little bit of a link in the chat on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do now is make Tony Czernetsky, who will be the host of the next session, the panelist here.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Piotr, for your introduction. I hope you have a sunny afternoon, as we have it here in London, on that VE 75th anniversary. This is a Europe Day today, and a number of NGOs, organizations around Europe have come together under the banner of Citizens Takeover Europe to present certain ideas, suggestions on how citizens can be much more engaged in the coming Future of Europe conference, on which I'll be talking later on. I have been also assisted by the New Europeans and the EuropeFutureFringe, the two NGOs that form part of Citizens Takeover Europe. Perhaps I introduce myself properly. I am managing partner of Sustensis, which focuses on promoting ideas and inspirations for humanity's transition to coexistence with superintelligence. But don't worry, I'm not going to talk about superintelligence today a lot. I'll mention it because, after all, as I said, it is the VE Day, it's the Europe Day. But anyway, my presentation will essentially follow three streams, which correlate with the books that I have published so far. The first one is who is going to take charge of the pretty difficult situation that Europe and the world have found themselves. I covered that subject in my first book, Who Could Save Humanity from Superintelligence? The second question is, what needs to be done first? And I answered that question in my second book, Democracy for a Human Federation. The third question relates very much to what we are discussing today. Where to now? Where Europe should be going? Where the world should be aiming? And I'm covering it in the Becoming a Butterfly book, which will be on the shelves in June 2020. So if you have any questions that you couldn't ask during this presentation or just after, you can always send me an email or participate in the comments on the Sustensis website as below. So, European Federation by 2025, how is it possible? Well, we have been challenged by a number of crises. Luckily, they are not yet coming together. At the moment, we have one threat, which is a coronavirus, and I'll be talking a little bit about that because it's also the context for my presentation. So what are the threats? What are the weaknesses of our organizations and of ourselves? How we are unprepared to stand to the crisis that we will be facing. But also, what are the opportunities that may be right now at our doorstep, and we are not picking them up in order to make the situation better? And finally, can we identify any strengths, not just in us, but also in the organizations that support us? That will be the subject of my presentation. So I start with threats. So what are the threats? Well, you probably think that I'll be talking about coronavirus. Coronavirus is a threat. But in my view, despite the horror for thousands of families of an unexpected death of the loved ones, I think it is not a very big threat or existential threat for humanity. Just to the contrary, it's a kind of a vaccination for humanity to prepare us for even greater challenges. So you may ask that perhaps the threat I have in mind is climate change. Well, you may be right. But if only we had climate change to deal with, we also have, yes, you got it right, artificial intelligence. This is spot on. This is the threat that I'll be talking about a little bit. And this is a kind of a driver for us to motivate us to deliver the solutions that will save not just Europe, but perhaps humanity. Because humanity is in danger, not just because of coronavirus, climate change, or superintelligence. Although superintelligence or artificial intelligence that will become superintelligence is the biggest and the most imminent risk that we face. And I'm talking about the man-made risks, the risks that we created ourselves. There are 9 top such risks identified by various scientific organizations like Global Challenges Report or Stern Report. And as you can see at the top is really artificial intelligence. This is the most imminent one. If you have any doubts, you can always consult the internet. You can Google about the number that I give you to reassure yourself that this is really so. Because by 2030, we may lose control over AI. It is a critical existential risk. It is just unbelievable that so few politicians talk about it. Because what kind of interest would they have to talk about that kind of risk at the doorstep during the elections? The voters would turn out. They will not accept this as something real, but it is real. By 2050, we may be in the hands of superintelligence. And then you may be asking question, will there be a good, a friendly superintelligence, or will it be a malicious one that may lead to the extinction of human species? The overall risk of human extinction by 2100, so if you add all those risks together, is from 20 to over 50%. And scientists such as the eminent Stuart Russell, the late Professor Stephen Hawking, Sir Martin Rees, the former astronomer royal, and many other scientists in the area of existential risks management, and especially artificial intelligence, confirm that the risk is in that range. But on top of that, unfortunately, as you can observe yourselves, we no longer live in normal times. You probably heard about the gentleman from Athens living 2,500 years ago there, who created a theme, Panta Rhel, saying that no man ever steps in the same river twice. What he meant was that change is the most fundamental feature, not just of life, but of the universe. Today, we know that, but that change is no longer happening at the rate to which we were used to. So every year, the same kind of increase in our well-being, or the global GDP, or the number of cars that we've produced. That is more or less change which we call linear. What is happening since the last few years is that pace of change is becoming nearly exponential in most areas. But what does it really mean? If you look at this graph, there is a red line at the bottom. This is the linear change. That's how change normally has been happening, a little bit every year. The yellow line shows the exponential change, and that's what I'm talking about. That once it reaches so-called knee of curve, it goes almost straight up. That's what exponentiality means. And I'll give you a very quick example based on this following assumption. Let's say that I make 1 meter step. That's a linear step. You make 1 meter step. One make another step. You make the second step, but this is twice as long as the previous one. So we made already 3 meters. I make the third step. You make the first step, which is again twice as big as the previous one, and so on. And when I come to the 30th step, the distance that you would have covered is over 1 million kilometers. You would have circled the globe over 26 times. That's what exponential change means. And it has been prominent in many areas. The most recent one is, for instance, this conference that I'm giving via Zoom. 2 months ago, very few people heard of that. Now we have 500 million of people. That's what exponential change means, almost from 0 to nearly infinity. We've obviously had it in the processor speed, and genome sequences, biomeat production, and many other areas. What I'd like you to remember from this presentation, if you forget everything else, just remember this. What now takes a year to achieve will take less than a week in 2030. So how can we minimize those risks? The organization that I mentioned earlier, the Future of Humanity Institute, has made a list of such risk mitigation requirements. And at the top of that list is to create the supranational organization. Our main threat is that we pretend that existential risks don't exist. And that's why we do not have such an organization that would be capable of dealing such a risk. If you think about coronavirus right now and how inadequate is the response of the WHO, then you see what I have in mind. So to overcome the threat, the world would need to federate, to create a supranational organization. So that's the threats that we're talking about. So now that leads me straight to weaknesses. I said earlier that we should create an international, supranational organization that would require federation of almost all the nations on the planet Earth. Can we do it? Well, look at this. To federate would mean to give up on some of our rights, which we love and we want to keep forever, like justice. But whose justice? Whose values would prevail? Like, for instance, there is a quarrel between the European Court of Justice and the German Supreme Court, who has the supremacy over the European Central Bank. There are similar questions put forward in Hungary and Poland. Who is right? Whose values prevail? That's a question that essentially will come to the fore several times in my presentation. Equal representation. Shouldn't we ask a question in the view of the populists that you see around? Should everyone's vote be equal? This is a fundamental question. I don't have an answer to it. Anybody that gives an answer will displease many, many people, but nevertheless, the question should be asked. Freedom, what does it mean? For most people, it means an absolute freedom. Think about those people, like for instance, the London parks that roam around freely during the COVID-19 pandemics, saying, well, they are free to do whatever they want. Yes, they are also free to infect, because they encroach on the freedom of others by saying that someone's freedom is absolute. The other people cannot be absolute. They will be infringed on. So we can't even accept these basic stuff. So we need rights to be balanced with responsibilities. And that's at an individual level. At nation, states level, we have to give up sometimes some freedom and sovereignty in order to make us safer. Because there is only one absolute value, and it is life itself. So our main weakness is that planet Earth doesn't have a strong federation, because federation would mean the limitations of some of our rights. We want a cake and we want to eat it. You have to make a choice, and we don't have too much time for deliberation. So which organization could take the role of a de facto world government? You would think the United Nations is an ideal candidate. We have had it for 75 years exactly. So why shouldn't they do that? Well, I've asked the same question in my first book, and I did quite a thorough research, taking into account those 10 criteria, like democratic institution, military power, economic power, and so on. And this is which organization came on the top? European Union. United Nations is in the 7th place, just behind Australia. Okay, there is not a big difference between NATO and the USA. So you could say, okay, why not NATO? That's not the point. We will have to have one of these organizations anyway. And I have selected the European Union because, at least numerically, it's a little better. And this is a very good example of how we could federate the world around such an organization. And the rest of my presentation is really focusing on that, how this can be done, how the European Federation can be federated by 2025, especially if there is a sudden crisis. So, in order to play the role of a de facto world government, the European Union, of course, would have to become the European Federation first. So, I've done a number of scenarios how this could be done. The first scenario assumes that there is a step-by-step or a sudden transition of the European Union into the European Federation. So we will have a common European budget, and then in a few years' time or months' time, we will have a European Union army and the European foreign minister and so on, step by step. And this is actually happening. But there are many other steps that would need to be done. And then there is putting the dot of an I to make a country, a state, a nation within the Federation. So the statehood would be removed. The sovereignty principle would be at the level of the European Federation. But that, in my view, is the most likely way that the European Federation will actually happen. When we have a sudden event where we'll have to, like we may have right now, because we are only at the beginning of the crisis. The real crisis will start in a few months' time. So that would be a lesser evil. So the Federation of Europe wouldn't be ideal. It would be ad hoc, and it would be, let's say, 80-20 rule, but it would be better than nothing. The second one is kind of an idealist scenario where we, again, have a European Union convention, which will prepare a new constitution, and we will deliberate which country will lose and which country will win a little bit on federating, especially in the economic terms, and so on. And then there is the third scenario where the European Union simply collapses. My date for the final date by when the European Federation should happen is 2030. And that was several years ago when I was writing my first book. Today, I think we live in the post-coronavirus world, and we need to shift it by around 2025 because we have a crisis, and that may require a sudden transition to a European Federation most likely. We may have, after all, European Federation by accident by 2025. Now, are there any opportunities? Because so far I've covered threats and weaknesses. Now I'm coming to opportunities. And here's the opportunity. On 27th of November 2019, Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Macron got together in Paris and painting the Future of Europe conference. That's what they called. It was supposed to start, believe it or not, on the 1st of January. But of course, the European Council was procrastinating and didn't happen. Now it is envisaged to start in the autumn. There's a strong opposition from the European Council, which wouldn't be surprising, but there is a big support from the European Parliament, which is the key driving force. So what we need right now, and that's what that conference apparently is about, that finally we'll have the citizens of Europe to deciding of their own future and the way forward. So it's the citizens that must be the driving force here. So citizens' assemblies are an ideal model to break the mold. So how do they work? Well, they are called to debate a single major issue. The randomly selected citizens from the electoral roll. In every country, you've got a kind of, no, if not the jury service, you have an electoral roll. Only in the Anglo-Saxon world, you've got the jury service. But the principle here would apply for selecting citizens to the Citizens' Assembly. This is a Roman rule, more than 2,000 years old. It was also applied in Athens. The best example was in Ireland, where they elected around 100 representatives. For such a citizens' assemblies to work, it must be properly set up. And that's the biggest barrier. You have to pay those selected people for a long period, a year. They will be meeting over the weekends. And they will be learning a lot. They will be supported by experts. And then they will be deliberating and confronting their own views with the experience of others in order to make a decision, respecting the minority views as well. The best example here is the Irish Constitutional Binding Convention. Why I say binding, that the conclusion of that Citizens' Assembly were just rubber stamped by the Irish Parliament. It was a great success, and Ireland has been changed beyond belief in just a few years. That's the power of the Citizens' Assemblies. And now they have to be applied for the Future of Europe conference. What we have at the moment is the European Union Parliament proposal, a very detailed proposal, which envisages, and I have done this drawing on the basis of that proposal. It envisages there will be a conference plenary, which will constitute 250 to 300 members, 3 of which will come from the European Commission, 27 from the European Council, 135 from the European Parliament, 100 members from the national parliaments, some of the social partners, the regions, but none from the citizens' assemblies. And that is a situation untenable. It has to be changed. So Europe and the world may have an opportunity if we go forward to the final conclusion of that plenary. The European Parliament suggests to work bottom up. So what it suggested is that there are 6 so-called themes, like European institutions, where the European Constitution might be discussed, European economy, defense, and so on. To each of these themes, there will a unique citizens' assembly would be assigned, and the European Union changed the name from citizens' assemblies to Agora to reflect the Athenian democratic principle. So there are 6 Agoras, and there is an additional one they suggested to you, the Agora. And they will produce suggestions and feedback to conference plenary. And that conference plenary will make decisions and commitments, but they must be binding in order for the whole exercise that will last around 2 years to have any sense. At the moment, it is not clear. So what would be the European citizens' wish list? What should we, citizens, campaign for? And here is my wish list on your behalf. First of all, I believe that citizens' representatives must be included in the conference plenary, and they are not at the moment. Secondly, I think that the conference plenary should invite other European countries as observers or proposers. And the conference plenary decision, as I said, must be binding and become law. This is very important. It must be, in my view, the final product must be the outline of the European Constitution, not just the European Union Health Service as suggested by the European Council President, Mr. Charles, since that would be misrepresentation of the ideas of the overall conference. A new constitution should be approved by two-stage citizens' assemblies by 16% majority. We should set the firm date for the federalization, like for the 1st January 2025, based on the principle that we won't set everything. It's enough that we sort out 80% of the problems that we may face. And we must do the fast-track federalization enabled by what I call the minimal state principle, of which I'll be talking in a minute. We have to enable quick federalization by creating zones and accelerate accession of new members.
So we have covered threats, we have covered weaknesses, we have covered opportunities. Now we are coming to strengths. We have strength to implement those opportunities. Let's look what our ancestors did, because this is, after all, a VE day. We've been here before. One might say that we, the people, the citizens of Europe, can do it. Just to remind you, on the 75th anniversary of the VE Day, that they ended the 6-year lasting Second World War that left most of Europe in ruins. But then it was followed just 5 years later, and today is the 70th anniversary of the Schuman Declaration, which was the start of the Common Steel and Coal Union, which was the predecessor of the Treaty of Rome, signed 7 years later. And then we make a big jump to the 2009, the Treaty of Lisbon, and to where we are today, where we are discussing the National Citizens Assembly. So, in my view, we can do it again, but let's do it in a conciliatory way, because that's the major difference between how the parliaments work and how a citizens' assembly can work. So the goal of this conference for the future of Europe and the citizens' assemblies should be the same, in my view, the creation of the European Federation, which would be based on the new constitution, and that would set that federation from the very start as a minimal state. And this is not a concept that I have just invented. This is a political scientist's term for defining a federation which fulfills just minimum needs of a given set of countries that decided to federate. In the case of the European Federation, we would have a state with what I suggest be 4 subsidiary zones, of which a little bit more later. Foreign Affairs Minister, the European Army, about which Mr. Macron is talking so much, about the federal finance with the federal budget, say 10% of GDP, that means 10 times more than we are paying right now to Confederated European Union, Federal Home Affairs, police, agencies. We already have around 50. Official language would be English, because that is lingua franca of today. And we would need European Federation Constitutional Court with strong power, so that we avoid the situation that we have right now with the German Supreme Court and the European Central Bank. What may be interesting for those anti-federalists is that this minimal state will actually repatriate some of the current laws back to the European Union nations. And we can have a 20-year cohesion, what I would call wealth distribution program, which has been the case for the last 20 years anyway. So, if you want to get support of European citizens, they will ask a question: what's in it for me? And this is my, if you like, kind of wish list. First of all, I think you would have to ensure that the situation that we have right now with democracy, which is essential on its knees, with the populism taking control almost every aspect of our life. If you think about America and Donald Trump, we need a new system of democracy, which I call consensual presidential democracy, about which I write very thoroughly in my second book, Democracy for Human Federation, because it would add additional control over those who govern over us, with the president and 2 vice presidents with significant powers, which would, who would always become a kind of ultimate arbiter, because that kind of constitution favors coalitions. And if the coalition cannot come to an agreement, there must be an arbiter, and president would be an ideal person to do that. Citizens' chamber and MP's chamber in the same parliament, which would add additional control, maximum 2 term of governing at any political level, again, additional control over the legislators, reforming company law, like equal stakeholder rights, a big subject, in order to have additional control over how money is being earned and how wealth is distributed, using citizens' assembly system instead of referenda, again, to minimize the impact of fake news and populism, introducing universal basic income to have a much better wealth distribution, raising minimum living wage, say, to 1,000 euro from the current 700 average, that would be the minimum, having large infrastructure projects which will focus on maximizing the use of green energy for civilizational resilience. And that's my current wish list as far as the political sphere is concerned. I will talk a little bit more about another aspect of the new arrangement between the governed and the governing. Now, when in chaos, fast-track route to European Federation by 2025. Use this. This is my suggestion. We would have a conference plenary session that would come up with a mandate for a new European Constitution, including European Federation. That will, so that's the product of the Citizens Assembly that we are talking earlier. So that will give a mandate for a new European constitution, including European federations, to the 27 national citizens' assembly. You remember that the conference plenary only had 6 themes and 6 agoras on 6 conference assemblies in different countries. This one would envisage having national citizens' assembly in every country, and the input to the debate would be the proposal for defining the European Constitution with a proviso that one of the options, not necessarily that it will be defined as a certainty, would be the creation of the European Federation. So each country would select randomly, say 100 to 300 citizens, depending on the number of citizens in the given country, from electoral list, like it was before. And then, once those national assemblies have voted and have come to the agreement on whether to support this initial document or not, they will elect 10 to 15 randomly selected delegates from each country, so there will be around 300 people in total, to the Constitutional Citizens Assembly. And that Constitutional Assembly would essentially create the Constitution in every aspect of it, because it will be advised by the lawyers, constitutional lawyers. And that Constitution will be sent to the European Parliament for the final rubber stamping, essentially, approval. And the final product will be the Constitution of the European Federation, or the Constitution of the European Union, depending on the situation. But I assume that by 2025, we may have to resort to what most of the politicians in Europe don't want, to the European Federation, because it will be the lesser evil. That will be the least risky strategy forward, because in my view, Europe and the world will be in such a dire crisis after this coronavirus pandemic has subsided, that there will be no other options, essentially. Oh, yes, there is another option, that we may not have a European Federation at all, and the European Union will just fall apart. So in this scenario, European Federation would be created from the European zone, Eurozone, which is essentially there. We remember that we already have 2 zones, the Eurozones and non-Eurozones, with 8 countries. So that would mean that in the first instance, the 19 countries that are already in the Eurozone would federate, with perhaps in the meantime till 2025, there may be 1 or 2 new countries from the current non-Eurozone members joining them. The rest will be in Zone 1, which I call European Federation Convergence Area. This is like an antechamber, a waiting room, where the countries for up to 5 years will be preparing for becoming European Federation member. So all those 9 countries that are now, so 8 countries that are outside the Eurozone would become member. And then we have European Federation Single Market area, similar as today, where, say, 9 European Union candidates could join. European Federation Customs Union, again, we have it already, with the prominent member Turkey, a member for several decades. But to this zone, there could be other countries like Canada, Japan, Australia joining as well. And finally, we will have the European Federation Association Area. Again, we have association agreements with, believe it or not, 30 countries, and there are more in the pipeline. So by 2040, 2045, I'm just leaping forward, we may have the Human Federation, the Federation of the World, embracing essentially all countries of the world, including all the superpowers. If anybody is interested how the superpowers can join the Human Federation, just either go to Sustensis website or have a look at the Democracy for the Human Federation book. So how to gain support from the citizens of Europe? That's the question that EuropeFutureFringe has asked in December last year. 45 NGOs together created an organization. The aim is to have those European future fringes assigned to every Citizens Assembly in Europe. In the meantime, the European Parliament changed the name, as I mentioned, from Citizens Assemblies to Agora to reflect what used to be a Citizens Assembly in ancient Greece. And that's what it looked like. You can see the Acropolis and the Parthenon at the top. Just around 2 kilometers down, there is a place called Nyx, which is an open area, like a theater, where from 50 eligible Athenians to vote, 6,000, around 6,000 were elected randomly, and they were coming to Nyx and were debating for weeks, or sometimes months, on various important matters of the day. And at the same time, when they were debating, 1 kilometer from that place, around 1 kilometer, is Agora. It was essentially a marketplace. And that marketplace at that time has become a kind of a debating area where normal, ordinary citizens were debating what was the most important issues of the day, and they was making suggestions and ideas to those people that were over there at Nyx. So today, Nyx is essentially the Citizens Assembly, and Agora is what is the EuropeFutureFringe. So food for thought. Perhaps if you change the name to Agora. It can be remembered and pronounced easily in any European language. It reflects the Europe-wide and not just a national context, and it represents exactly the ancient tradition. So the European Parliament and the European citizens must keep pressure on all the politicians in the 27 countries to keep the momentum going. So what will be the role of the future EuropeFutureFringe or EuroAgora? If we put it in the middle, so what I envisage is that this set of NGOs or ordinary citizens in every European country where the European Citizens Assembly would take place, they would gather on those days or weeks and organize multi-event programs explaining proposals and the role of citizens' assemblies. I say multi-event because since there will be many of those sessions of the citizen assemblies, so there will be many events. This should mix entertainment with some serious politics, engaging local media, TV, in almost every large city, not only in the city, in the given country where the Citizens Assembly would be debating. They should also promote balanced and factual discussions on both sides of arguments in order to reach consensus. That's what I have been emphasizing throughout my presentation. That, in my view, would create what I'd call a critical mass of support and pressure on the local MPs and other politicians, especially on the prime ministers and MEPs, to change the way that democracy works in the European Union in order to make deep reforms in this organization. That discussions will also provide new proposals to thematic agoras, so those 6 thematic agoras like the institutions, defense, economy, and so on. And finally, we should not forget that this is the Future of Europe conference, not the Future of European Union. Therefore, we should also engage countries that are not the members of the European Union yet, like the Ukraine, European Economic Area, so Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Iceland, and of course the UK. So that's what I have to say. I invite now your questions. Hopefully we'll have answers for them. If you do not have time, because we are running out of time right now, to get answer to your question, then you can always leave a comment at the Sustensis website, and here is this address. So thank you very much for listening.